Dvorkai had never lost a siege, not once. Not in 400 years of expansion across 63 systems. Not against the Koran, who had held for 11 months before their orbital defenses failed. Not against the Velhari, who had fought with a ferocity that the Dvorkai still respected and had still beaten in the end. Not against any of the 41 civilizations that had tried to hold their planets against the Dvorkai siege doctrine and had eventually, inevitably, watched their defenses come down and their world change hands. The siege doctrine was simple. It had been refined over 400 years into something that was less a military strategy and more a mathematical certainty. You surrounded the target, you cut off supply lines, you eliminated orbital defenses systematically. Beginning with the most capable and working down, you applied pressure at a rate that was sustainable for the besieging force and unsustainable for the defending one. You waited, everything surrendered eventually. Everything ran out of something: ammunition, food, energy, hope. The Dvorkai were patient in the particular way that civilizations became patient when patience had worked for 400 years without exception. Supreme Commander Drax had personally overseen 9 sieges. He had never had to fire a single weapon at a planetary surface. The orbital phase was always sufficient. By the time the orbital defenses were gone, the planet below understood its situation clearly enough that the ground phase was administrative rather than military. He had begun the siege of Kerath Station, humanity's largest deep space installation, positioned at the junction of 3 major trade routes and housing approximately 800,000 people, and with the calm professionalism of someone performing a task they had performed many times. He expected it to take 4 months. It took 4 months and 11 days before he understood that something was wrong. The first indication was the supply situation. Kerath Station's supply situation should have been straightforward. The station's documented storage capacity, its population, its energy requirements. All of this was in the intelligence files, and the intelligence files were good. The Dvorkai had been watching Kerath Station for 3 years before beginning the siege. They knew, within acceptable margins of error, how much of everything the station had. The margins of error turned out not to be acceptable. At 4 months, Kerath Station should have been running low on 3 critical categories of supply. Drax's logistics officers had modeled the consumption rates carefully, accounting for conservation measures that any intelligent defending population would implement, and had projected that by month 4 the pressure of scarcity would be producing the behavioral signals that preceded capitulation. Reduced defensive activity, increased communication attempts, the gradual unwinding of organized resistance as the reality of the situation became impossible to manage. The defensive activity had not reduced, the communication attempts had not increased, the organized resistance was. His tactical officers reported with the careful precision of people delivering information they found confusing, actually increasing, not dramatically, not in ways that suggested a breakthrough or a reversal of the strategic situation, but measurably. Month 4's resistance was more organized than Month 1's, more adaptive. More efficient was the word his tactical officer used, and then immediately qualified it. Because efficiency in a besieged population was not a concept that fit the standard model. Drax reviewed the supply projections himself. Then he reviewed them again. Then he had his logistics team review them independently. The projections were accurate. The consumption rates were accurate. The storage capacity was accurate. Something else was not accurate. They are producing, his logistics officer said, on day 122 of the siege. We assessed their production capacity at the beginning as insufficient to meaningfully extend their supply timeline. That assessment appears to have been wrong. How wrong? Drax asked. The logistics officer was quiet for a moment. We are not certain, she said, because we do not know what they are producing or how. We can only observe that their resource consumption is not matching our projections, which means either they are conserving at rates beyond what we modeled as possible, or they are producing at rates beyond what we assessed as possible. She paused. Based on the defensive activity data, I believe it is production. What are they producing? We do not know, she said. That is the problem. Drax ordered a detailed surveillance sweep of Kerath Station's external activity on day 123. The sweep took 11 hours. What it produced was data that his analysis team spent 3 days with before delivering their assessment. The assessment was that Kerath Station had, in the 4 months since the siege began, significantly modified its external configuration, not the defensive systems. Those were where they had been, doing what they had been doing, holding the line against Vorkai pressure, with the same stubborn consistency that had characterized the entire siege. But around the defensive systems between them, in spaces that the Vorkai's targeting algorithms had classified as non-tactical and had not been watching closely, things had been built, not weapons, not defenses. His analysis team had examined the structures carefully and had concluded that they were not military in any conventional sense. They appeared to be, his lead analyst used the phrase industrial infrastructure and then qualified it because industrial infrastructure was not something you built on the outside of a space station in the middle of a siege. What kind of industrial infrastructure? Drax asked. Manufacturing, his analyst said. We believe they are manufacturing components. The structures are consistent with assembly processes rather than weapons systems. She paused. We believe they are building things. Building what? She was quiet for a moment. We do not know, but based on the energy signatures and the material processing indicators, whatever they are building requires significant raw material input. She paused again. Sir, their raw material input is coming from the debris field. Drax looked at her. The debris field was the accumulated result of 4 months of orbital combat, destroyed Vorkai ships, disabled weapon platforms, the wreckage of engagements that the Vorkai had won and that had left material scattered across the engagement zone. Standard siege practice was to ignore the debris field. It had no tactical value. The material was damaged, fragmented, distributed across too large a volume to be efficiently recovered. They are salvaging our destroyed ships, he said slowly. Yes, she said. We believe so. Using small recovery craft that operate in the debris field during low-intensity periods. Recovering material that we have not been targeting because we assessed it as having no value. She paused. It appears to have value to them. Drax spent 3 days thinking about what he had learned, not just thinking, investigating. He had his intelligence team pull everything available on human manufacturing and engineering practices. He had them review every piece of documented human response to resource scarcity. He had them look at historical human behavior in situations of extended siege or blockade. What he found did not answer his questions. It multiplied them. Humans had a documented history of what their own historians called improvised manufacture, the practice of producing functional technology from non-standard, damaged or salvaged materials under conditions of scarcity. It was not unusual for civilizations to have this capability to some degree. What was unusual was the depth of it in human practice. The historical record was full of examples, spanning their entire documented history, of humans producing things from materials that should not have been sufficient, of manufacturing processes that adapted in real time to whatever was available rather than requiring specific inputs. His engineering officer reviewed the historical documentation and delivered his assessment with the flat affect of someone who had reached a conclusion he would have preferred not to reach. They have been doing this for their entire history, he said. Every period of human history that involved resource scarcity produced innovations in manufacture from non-standard materials. The capability appears to be deeply embedded in their engineering culture, not a specialized skill in a general one. He paused. Sir, if they are salvaging our debris field and processing it through whatever manufacturing infrastructure they have built, we do not know what they are capable of producing. We do not have a model for this. What would you need to build a model? Drax asked. Time, his engineering officer said, and access to their manufacturing processes, which we do not have. He paused. Sir, we have been besieging them for 4 months. They have spent 4 months building a manufacturing infrastructure from our wreckage. In 4 more months, he stopped. What? Drax said. I do not know, his engineering officer said. That is precisely the problem. In 4 more months, they will have had 8 months to build things from materials we provided them. And I cannot tell you what 8 months of human improvised manufacture produces because I do not have a model for it, and the historical record suggests the answer is always more than we expect. 6 was when the ships appeared. Not many, not a fleet. 3 vessels. emerging from Kerath Station's docking infrastructure in the early hours of station time, running without transponders, moving in a pattern that Drax's tactical system initially classified as an escape attempt before reclassifying it when the vessels did not move away from the Vorkai fleet. They moved toward it. Drax watched the tactical display with the particular quality of attention that he brought to things that did not fit any existing category. The three vessels were not human ships, not in any configuration that matched humanity's documented fleet specifications. They were assembled was the word his tactical officer used, built from components that the sensors could not fully characterize because the components were not standard. Salvaged, processed, reconfigured into something that had not existed before the siege began. They were also, his tactical officer noted with the careful precision of someone reading data, they found difficult to believe, armed, not with weapons from humanity's documented arsenal, with weapons that appeared to have been fabricated from. His tactical officer stopped speaking and ran the analysis twice before continuing. From components of Vorkai weapon systems recovered from the debris field. Disassembled, understood, reconfigured into something that was mounted on vessels built from the hulls of Vorkai ships. Humanity had spent 6 months building ships, from the wreckage of the fleet besieging them and arming those ships with weapons salvaged from that same fleet. Drax looked at the tactical display. For a long time. Their capabilities? He asked. His tactical officer was quiet for a moment. Unknown, he said. The weapons are derived from our systems, but they have been modified in ways that our analysis cannot fully characterize. The vessels are constructed from our materials, but the configuration is not consistent with any known design. We do not have baseline data for what these ships can do because they have never existed before. He paused. Sir, we have been providing them with materials for 6 months. We do not know what they have learned from those materials. The three ships held position at the edge of weapons range. Then a transmission came through. The human commander who appeared on Drax's screen was a woman he had seen before and in the initial communications at the beginning of the siege. Before communications had been restricted to the standard capitulation channels, Commander Yena Osei, 50 years old, come in the way that people became calm when they had committed to something fully and the committing was behind them. Supreme Commander, she said, we have been besieged for 6 months. Yes, he said. In 6 months, she said, we have salvaged approximately 40% of the material from your debris field. We have processed that material through manufacturing infrastructure we built in the first 2 months. We have produced, she paused, a number of things, some of which you are looking at. Others which you are not. She looked at him steadily. I want to show you something before this conversation goes further. She shared a display. It was a technical schematic. His engineering officer, looking at it from across the bridge, went very still. What is that? Drax asked. That, Osei said, is a schematic for a weapon system derived from your fleet's primary armament. We reverse engineered it from salvaged components in month 2. We have been manufacturing it since month 3. She paused. It is not identical to your original system. We made modifications based on what we assessed as design limitations in the original. We believe the modified version is more effective. She paused again. I am showing you this because I want this conversation to be honest. And honest requires that you understand what 6 months of siege has produced. Drax looked at the schematic. His weapons officer, who had spent 30 years with Vorkai weapon systems, was looking at the schematic with an expression that Drax had not seen on his face before. Sir, his weapons officer said quietly, the modification she described, we identified that as a theoretical improvement 12 years ago and assessed it as impractical to implement with existing manufacturing methods. He paused. They implemented it in 6 months, Drax said. With salvaged materials, his weapons officer said. Yes, Drax looked at Osei on the screen. What do you want? I want to stop, she said simply. Not surrender, stop, there is a difference. She looked at him steadily. You came here to besiege us into submission. We have spent 6 months demonstrating that the siege is producing outcomes you did not intend. We have your materials. We have your weapon designs improved. We have ships built from your hulls. She paused. We are not winning this engagement. We are also not losing it in the way you planned. And in 6 more months, she stopped. Let the silence carry what she did not say. In 6 more months, Drax said slowly, you will have had a year. Yes, she said, and a year of this produces. We do not know exactly, she said. We have projections. I suspect your engineering team has projections now too. She paused. I suspect our projections are similar. Drax looked at the tactical display, at 3 ships built from his own fleet's wreckage, at a weapons schematic that his own weapons officer had just told him was an improvement on Vorkai design, at 6 months of siege that had produced not submission but infrastructure. He thought about 400 years of sieges, about everything surrendering eventually, about patience working every time. He thought about what happened when patience provided your enemy with raw materials for 6 months. You are proposing a ceasefire, he said. I'm proposing a conversation, she said, about what this engagement has demonstrated and what we do with that demonstration. She paused. We did not want this siege. We do not want to continue it. But we have spent 6 months becoming more capable than we were. And we would like to have the conversation about what comes next before 6 more months pass and the conversation becomes more complicated. The ceasefire lasted 3 days before it became negotiations. The negotiations lasted 6 weeks. What emerged from 6 weeks of negotiation was not a standard post-siege settlement. It was not a surrender document or a territorial agreement or any of the instruments that 400 years of Vorkai expansion had produced. It was a research partnership, specifically Orman, a partnership focused on manufacturing methodology, because in 6 months of siege, humanity had produced advances in improvised manufacture and material reconfiguration that Vorkai engineering had not achieved in 400 years of working with standard materials and standard processes. And Vorkai engineering had 400 years of systematic development that humanity had never had access to. The partnership that combined them produced in its first 2 years 11 manufacturing innovations that neither civilization had approached alone. Drax filed his report on the engagement 3 months after the negotiations concluded. His superior read it twice and called him personally. You ended a siege with a research partnership, his superior said. Yes, Drax said. That has never happened before. No, Drax said. It has not. What made you agree to it? Drax thought about 3 ships built from his own fleet's wreckage, about a weapons schematic that improved on Vorkai design, about what a year of siege would have produced. They spent 6 months turning our siege into a manufacturing program, he said. I decided that a civilization capable of that was more valuable as a partner than as a conquest. He paused. I also decided that continuing the siege was going to produce outcomes that I was not able to model, and I have learned to be cautious about situations I cannot model. His superior was quiet for a moment. How did they do it, he asked. The manufacturing. The salvage. In 6 months. Drax thought about the historical documentation, about improvised manufacture spanning all of human history, about a capability so deeply embedded in their culture that it was not a specialized skill but a general one. They have been doing it their entire history, he said. Every time they ran out of something they needed, they found a way to make it from what they had. 400 years of siege doctrine assumes that cutting off supply creates scarcity. For humans, he paused. For humans, scarcity appears to be a design prompt. His superior was quiet for a long time. A design prompt, he said finally. Yes, Drax said. They do not experience running out of something as a defeat. They experience it as a problem that requires a solution. And they have been solving that problem in every possible domain for their entire recorded history. He paused. I do not think our siege doctrine accounts for that. No, his superior said. It does not. I would recommend, Drax said, that we update it. There was a long pause. Yes, his superior said finally. I believe you are right.